the Instructor podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor podcast. This is a show that helps you become an even more awesome driving instructor and run a better driving business. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook. I'm delighted to be here, but even more delighted that you have chosen to listen because we are back with the first episode of Season 8. And I'm delighted to announce that Bright Coaching have opted to continue their sponsorship throughout Season 8. And to find out more about what Bright Coaching have to offer, including the new online cohort, head over to brightcoaching.net, or you can find them at the Intelligent Instructor and ADI NJC Expo in Newark on September the 29th. So yeah, I'm chuffed that Bright have continued their sponsorship into Season 8, and those of you with eagle eyes and ears will have noticed it's a little bit different, because I've dropped every episode on the same day, Netflix style. But that's not the only difference. For this season, I drove down to Peterborough and spent a couple of days recording in person with Laura Morris of Go Green and Costa Coffee. So every episode is just me and Laura, and we basically put the world to right. But on this first episode, Laura flipped the tables and decided to interrogate me, including asking me the toughest question I've been asked on a podcast in the first few minutes. But just before we dive in, I'd like to point you in the direction of the Instructor podcast website, where you can get access to the entire back catalogue of episodes, all of our free resources, and find out more about the Instructor membership. Head to www.theinstructorpodcast.com. But for now, let's get stuck into the show. So today on the Instructor podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Morris of Go Green. How are we doing, Laura?
Hey, I'm good, thank you.
Oh, thank you for joining me today, because a little while ago, in fact, I'll start by saying this. You are the reason we are doing this today, because a little while ago, I was debating where to take the Instructor podcast next, what to do. I was in a bit of a funk, shall we say, and I'd come down to see you about something else. We'd come down for a chat, met Costa, surprisingly. And yeah, we got on to talking about that, and you told me that you would... You wanted to interview me, which has led to this whole concept of us picking these topics that we're going to be talking about throughout this season. But I know you wanted to ask me some questions as well. So why did you want to interview me?
That's a good question. I think I always felt that you do so many episodes and podcasts and everything with so many other good trainers and good people out there. But I don't think I've ever seen an episode about you. And I kind of just wanted to turn it around on you. And I think I want to hear about you, and that's not out there at the moment.
Is that where we'll start then? Why never do episodes about me?
Tell us why nothing's been about you so far. How long have you actually done the podcast for?
The April 2021, the Instructor podcast came out. Wasn't my first one. My first podcast was the 5-Minute Theory, which is the theory podcast for learners. I think that was at the end of 2020, it might have been right at the start of 2021, but the Instructor podcast kicked off in April 2021. So, yeah, a little while now.
And then nothing has ever been about you or where you've come from or why you're here or why you're doing this. Why have you never spoken about yourself?
There was one episode about me once. I got an old friend of mine, Emma Morgan, who I used to do a different podcast called Decapod with, nothing to do with instructors, don't check it out. And I got her to interview me at the end of, I think it was season 1, to talk about it because I was that excited about it. But as for why there's nothing about me, there's many reasons. There's many reasons. One of which is that there's definitely a bit of self-confidence there. Especially earlier on, maybe the earlier seasons, maybe seasons 1 to 5, where I would doubt that I had anything to offer. I think there was definitely some of that there. I know earlier on when I kicked off that first or second season, I was really raw in the industry. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know. So for me, part of the reason I did the podcast was because, how can I put this? The stuff I wanted wasn't there. So I wanted to listen to people talk about the business side of it, talk about the coaching aspects, to talk about the mental health aspects, to talk about confidence, all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't there back in 2021, or I suppose 2020 when I first started thinking about it. So I'm like, okay, well, if it's not there, I'll just do it. So that's when I went and found these experts in this. And I think that is also why there's not as much as me, because I never want to be the smartest person on the podcast ever about the topic we're talking about specifically, because if I am, what's the point of me having the guest on? So I want someone that knows more than me, so I can ask from the listener's perspective the questions that the listener would want to hear from that expert. So I would get you on to talk about PDI stuff, because you know shitloads more than I do about PDI stuff. So why would I do an episode on that? I want you on and I want to find out that stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a confidence thing. There's definitely a self-doubt thing. But I think the biggest thing is probably that idea of, I want the expert on. And if I'm the expert, what's the point of me getting someone on?
I think we all have different things to offer. You said you weren't really sure what you had to offer. What do you have to offer now? If someone said to you, Terry, what do you have to offer me? What would be your answer?
4 minutes into a recording and you've asked me the most uncomfortable question I've ever been asked on a podcast.
Why is it uncomfortable?
And now you've asked me the second most uncomfortable question I've ever been asked on a podcast. I'll answer that first. I still to this day do not like putting myself out there. Because this is, again, I get you want to talk about PDI stuff because you know more. I will happily chip in with the stuff I know. I always try and make episodes sort of 70-30 in favour of the guest, because I want to showcase the guest. I want to get that expertise out, but I'll still put my tidbits across. But when you ask me that question, it's uncomfortable, because all of a sudden, I've got to own this now. I've got to say what I've got to offer about this specific thing. And my mindset is still, this person's an expert, this person's an expert, this person's an expert. Terry, what you got to offer? So,
do you not consider yourself an expert?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think this is a little trap I've laid for myself unintentionally. So let's use coaching as an example. For me, Bob Morton is the prominent coach in our industry. If I've got a coaching issue, I go to Bob Morton. And I've said this before, because I'm going to use this example again. If you're becoming a trainer and I ask you, are you as good as Bob Morton? You're almost definitely going to say, no, not you specifically, but generally, are you as good as Bob Morton? You're almost definitely going to say no. Well, why would I come to you then? Why wouldn't I just go to Bob? So then you would have to say, because I do this different. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, am I an expert coach? I think I'm getting there. I think I'm up towards that end of it. There are people better than me. Am I an expert in like the business side of stuff? Again, there's lots of bits I'm really good at. Do I have expertise in that? Yes. Am I where I want to be? No. But I don't know if I'd label myself as an expert. Do I know more than most in the industry? Probably. So I think there's lots of things where I've got expertise in. I'm not sure if I'd label myself an expert. The old tagline for the show was, I speak to experts, leaders, innovators, and game changers. I would consider myself a leader. I would consider myself a game changer. I would consider myself an innovator. I'm not sure I'll put myself in the expert bracket.
Okay, so tell us what you do have to offer.
I mean, so look, first and foremost, so you've got the actual tangible things, if you like. So there's the podcast. So if someone said to me, what do I have to offer? That is the first thing. It's like physical, not physical, but something I can send to someone where they can go and listen to, I suppose by the time this goes out, over 200 episodes that range from 7 minutes to an hour and 45 minutes, covering everything pretty much you could need in the industry. Beyond that, you've obviously got the membership, the paid content, which takes deeper dives into all the topics we do on the podcast. Then there's the other podcasts I do. So you've got that I have to send out. In terms of what I have to offer as an individual, I think it is coaching. And I don't think I would say coaching on a specific thing. One of the things I do in my premium content is problem solver sessions, which I shouldn't have called problem solve sessions because people don't know what it means. It's basically an ask me anything. And I do 4 a month. And I do get asked anything. I get people that come in there and be asking stuff about the standards check, or I'll be asking stuff about driving lessons. They ask about business, they ask about confidence, they ask about all this kind of stuff. And I think I'm a bit of a jack of all trades with that. And I mean that as a positive. jack of all trades, master of none, but master of none's better than one. I think that the phrase is somewhat like that. So I can help people become better. And I think the caveat I'll put on that, and I stand by this, and I think this is one of the things that makes me stand out, is even if I can't help, or if I think there's someone better suited, I will say, I can help you with this, definitely, but I will consider this person. And there are many times when I've done that and people have gone, I like that you've said that. I'm going to stay with you.
I like that. Tell me more about the podcast then. What was your initial intention of doing that? What made you start the podcast originally?
So it's probably a bigger question than you intended. I've always wanted to do a podcast, right? And even, I'll tell you what, when I go back to being a kid, high school, right? When I got asked what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a radio DJ. I wanted to be a disc jockey, right? I used to DJ for the Summerfield Primary Under 11s at the leaving do. I wanted to be a radio DJ. I never had the confidence to follow through with that. I think there's an element of that in what I do. Obviously, I'm not on the radio or anything like that. That's not what I'm doing. But I think there's an element of that. I've always loved audio over visual. So I've always wanted to do podcasts. And so that's what kind of led me down this initially. And it's what led me to do the 5-Minute Theory podcast. But I think I kind of mentioned earlier, when I was looking for something on instructors, and this might come out wrong, and it's not meant in any negative fashion, but the only podcast I could find at the time was this droppped, the Driving Instructor podcast. And it's 3 blokes sat around talking for an hour to 90 minutes a month. And I listened to it and I liked it and I got stuff from it, but I was very much, this isn't for me, this isn't what I want. What I want is something a bit more regular, something a bit consistent, and covers things on the peripherals of the industry, stuff that isn't talked about, like trying to think back to that first season. On that first season, I got a wrestling promo coaching to talk about confidence. And it's one of the best episodes I've ever done. I had someone on to talk about how instructors can be better allies to the LGBTQ plus community. I had someone on to talk about writing your driving instructor book. This kind of stuff, people from outside the industry, as well as people from within it, because it wasn't there. That wasn't available. And because it wasn't available, I can either moan about it or I can do something about it. So I did something about it. So it was a combination of wanting to do a podcast and then seeing an opening. And then that's where it came from.
So that's where you started. And now, talking about now, like in the present, what other podcasts are out there? What else is available?
So specifically for instructors within our industry?
Yeah.
I mean, look, you've got the other big 2. So you've got the Instructor podcast, which is the big one, obviously mine. Then you've got Driving Instructors Division Zero, which is the second best podcast in the industry, which is also hosted by me, weirdly enough. And then you've got the 1-Minute Driving Instructor Tips, which is also hosted by me, weirdly enough. And if you want me to tell you why I created those, I'll happily do that. But in terms of beyond that, like I said, droppped was the first one. Well, yes, the first. There were some others kicking about that kind of came and went and didn't really hang. A few weeks before mine came out, Mick Knowles released his, which I believe at the time was called the Did podcast. I think and now it's part of Kit, and that's still going, although I think it's been quiet for a little while. But I think they're bringing it back. Phil Cowley runs the Inspire Instructor Training podcast. Kevin Selwood, I think, still runs the Excel podcast. Josh Holleran does Mirror Signal podcast, which is actually now a podcast because it's got an RSS feed and I can listen to it on Spotify. It's not just a YouTube channel, so well done, Josh. I feel like I'm missing one, which is quite annoying, but I think there's another one out there that I've forgotten, but that'll annoy me now. But yeah, so there's, since I kind of kicked off and showed, I think, and maybe I'm wrong to phrase it this way, but I think I showed a lot of people that you can do this, and someone who at the time didn't know much can create this thing and help change industry and provide content and help people. There's been other people that have gone, oh yeah, that's interesting. Let's do that. And I mean that in a positive way.
So out of all of those kind of different podcasts, how are yours different? Are they different?
So the Instructor podcast is different for several reasons, although a few have followed in its footsteps. When I started the podcast, the premise was, well, there was two kind of goals for every episode. I wanted to showcase a guest and provide information, ideas, and inspiration for the listeners. That was always the goal. I wanted to make the guest look as good as I possibly could, even if they were direct competition. And maybe that competition is the wrong word, but on season 1, I got Mick Knowles on to promote the Did podcast. And his podcast came out a few weeks before mine. You could look back and go, that was direct competition, but I still got him on to promote that. I don't care. I want to promote him. So I want to make the guest look good. And part of my thinking is, if someone's listening to mine but don't really like it, then I show them Mick's and they go, oh, actually, I prefer Mick's. Great. I don't care they don't like mine. I'm happy that they've found something they can learn from. That was my big thing. But then also giving ideas and inspiration and information to the listeners. Now, I don't think anyone else did that around that time, that idea of really wanting to showcase the guest. Now there's a couple that do. Well, not one in particular does, and that's Mirror Signal Podcast with Josh. He takes that same approach of showcasing the guest. The other thing that makes the Instructor podcast different, I think, is the topics, the people, the conversations we have. Like I said, go back to that first season. You will not get ever, even from me now, a more varied episode. We had Bob Morton on, Chris Spencer, the wrestling promo coach, the lady that come on to talk about releasing your book. We had electric cars, LGBTQ+, we had some on road safety. I've forgotten a couple, but we had all this stuff that just, a lot of it on the peripherals of the industry. So I've always been happy to bring people in from the outside to say, look, we're quite insular in our industry at times. It's okay to reach out and go and look how other people do stuff and, take ideas and take inspiration from them. And even with things like, and I could get shot down for this, but whatever. Even with things like the Facebook group for the Instructor podcast, I do my weekend wins on there. And I do my Friday fail and I do my Monday advertising thread. They're my 3 main things that I've done. And I've done them for years on there. Well, I got that from Dan Meredith and Robin Bates in their groups, not from our industry. Now, again, someone else may have done it and I may not have seen it. But I got them from these other groups and I brought them into ours. And now I see other people doing it. Now, whether they got that from me or whether it was their own idea or whatever, but it's like, take from outside of the industry and bring in and see how we can evolve that. And I think the other thing that makes the Instructor podcast unique in the nicest possible way is me. Because I said before, I don't really care how I come across. I want to showcase the guest. And that's the most important thing for me. You come on my show, Laura, not for this episode, you made this one about me. But for the other 8 or 9 or however many we're doing on this season, I want you to come away looking as good as possible. Even though it's more 50-50 because we're having the conversation, I still want you to come away. And that shows in the promotion. Your picture or Go Green's picture will be on the promotion. It shows in the episode, the way I structure it, and it shows in the edit. Time goes into the edit, into what you say. I want to make you sound good. Not that you don't sound good anyway, obviously.
Okay, so what do driving instructors get out of your podcasts?
It depends which episode they listen to. Because sometimes they'll get loads and other times they'll get a little bit. And do you know what? I say that in jest, but it really does, because I look at podcasts and audiobooks and YouTube channels and anything where you listen to something. And by that, I don't mean that you can't watch it as well. I mean, anything that requires listening, I treat it as background noise until it isn't. So I will have a podcast on coming down. I drove it down here today. I'm in Peterborough, for those that don't know. I drove down here today. I'm listening to a podcast. It was an Andrew Huberman one. And interesting background noise, listening along. And then he said something. Oh, that's fascinating. Pause. Stop listening. Because I need to listen to that with a notepad and pen. So, right, skip to the next podcast, put some music on, whatever. And So that's kind of what they get from the podcast. They may find episodes that are quite heavily around, well, let's use coaching, for example, really specific in-car coaching, where they might get an absolute ton, and they're just scribbling stuff down, and they're going, oh, we can implement this, we can implement this, we can do this, we can do this. But then they might have one, try to think of an example. So I did one on sleep, because I think sleep's important, and as instructors we need to look after our health. Well, they might listen to that, and a lot of that might wash over them, but there might be one tip they get from it where they go, I'm going to go away and change this. Or it might just be one that they have on as background noise. So while I appreciate this probably isn't the answer you're after, I think it will massively depend on the episode they're listening to, because there is such a variety of episodes, and that's intentional. And like that sleep one is a prime example. I knew that when I put that episode out, the initial downloads for that would be crap. I knew that, because it's not about the standards check or part 3 or whatever. However, what I've noticed really with my podcasts is they all kind of have the same downloads. It's just the ones that aren't about the standards check tend to take a little bit longer to get there. And I think what happens is that the people that prioritize standards check stuff or in-car stuff prioritize those episodes, but still come back to the others. It's just that they prioritize them. So in terms of what people get from, I want them to get, if they get one thing from every episode, I'd genuinely be ecstatic. And whether that's a tip on sleeping or something they can bring into the car, or even if it's something I've said, God forbid, it's, if they could get one little thing that they can go and implement, that would be it. But that's the thing. That's what I encourage people to do. Take something they can implement. Don't just listen. Don't say, I want this background noise. Or have it on this background noise, but make sure you stop for the key moment that resonates with you. But take something to them, and don't just have it on in background. Otherwise, what's the point in listening?
Okay, I like that. Oh, tell me, what do you put into a podcast? Because I think, again, people see the finished product and they see everything, at face value. What goes on behind the scenes?
Oh, dear. So the standard kind of podcast will be me reaching out to someone initially, which is always the hardest bit for me. I hate asking people to come on, because I hate asking things of anyone. I'm saying this, appreciating you give up 2 days of your time to record this. But I hate asking people to come on. I've got better at it. I still do it. I've never not done it. But I do not like asking anything of anyone. So it obviously kicks off with that. Once they agree, it's research time. And research is interesting for this, because it's not research about the topic, or there is an element of that. But if someone's been on a podcast before, I will specifically go and listen to those podcasts, because I want to know how that person talks on a podcast so that I can tweak the way I talk. Really good example, San Harper. And I really, really hope she won't mind me saying this. San Harper does not respond well to direct questions. She'll answer them. She does it. She doesn't answer it. Maybe respond well is not the best way to phrase that. She doesn't respond as well. The best way to get a response from San is to start talking and watch for the glint in her eye, and then stop talking and let her start talking, and she'll drop some absolute dynamite, because she will pick up on something I've said and then run with it. So if I can listen to the way someone else talks on a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever, I can then tweak my interview technique to get the best from that person. So the research aspect isn't just about researching the topic or the person, it's researching how to get the best from that interview. Then there's obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, should I? But there's all the creation of all the show notes and stuff that I need for the episode. Record with a guest. I always budget 90 minutes. Because we like a bit of a chat before and after. I always tell the guests the same thing. Now, most episodes tend to be between 40 and 80 minutes long. But I always tell the guests the same thing. I don't care if it's 20 minutes long. I would rather have 20 minutes of gold than an hour of mediocrity. So we record, done, guest disappears, then I have to edit. And the editing is always fun, because again, it sounds like I'm being mean to people when I say this, but whatever, I don't care. I edit properly. So I will do a first edit which is often just editing the content, if you like. So if we pause during the show, or if someone says, oh, can you take that out, anything like that, I'll edit the big chunks out. Then I'll do a second edit, which is editing the ums and ahs and tidying up that kind of stuff. Don't take them all. I'll leave the thinking in, I think that will get left in. Me going, doesn't, and I'm annoyed when I miss them. So yeah, there's that. And then there's a third edit, which is when that's done, I'll then go for a walk and listen to that interview. And then I'll make notes. So if I've done it in my flat, I'll go back and edit it as I go. So if you imagine an episode being an hour long, I've just spent approximately 6 hours doing all that editing. Then if it's a normal Instructor podcast episode, I will do my pre-roll, which is the intro that I do. I will add an advert into the middle because, bills got to be paid. And I'll add often a post-roll on. And sometimes, like I did in the last season, I'll have like a little bit right at the end of the show. See, the people who listen will get to the end, they'll listen to music, they'll wait 30 seconds to hear a little snippet from me saying about which the best Rocky film is, or something like that. Then that's all uploaded, ready to go. Put the show notes in, which is all the description of the show. It's the links from the guest. Create the cover art, which will have the guest stuff on again to get that on. Then it's social media time, which is almost as much fun as asking people to come on the show. And that's what goes into making the podcast. I probably missed something, but that's about it.
That's quite a lot though, isn't it? I don't think, I personally didn't, even when you was talking just now, I think there was definitely bits that I didn't realise you did. Even the little things, like I say little, but you listening to the podcast yourself and sort of whilst you're going for a walk or whatever. I think I underestimated the amount of work that goes into that. But do you enjoy that process? Do you enjoy that?
Yeah, largely. It gets frustrating at times. And there are times when I'm on the third edit, I'm like, do I really need to do this? Because the thing is, when the episode goes out, I always listen to it the morning an episode goes out. Because I that's my chance to listen to the episode rather than edit the episode. And I'll still be annoyed because I'll still miss something. It's easy to find it. And I will get texts from people that say, why didn't you pull so-and-so up on this? Why did you leave this bit in or whatever? I'll get those messages. And it's always annoying because I'm like, yeah, I've already kicked myself for that, don't worry. But I do really enjoy all of that process, which makes it easy. The fact I enjoy it makes it easier. And look, are there times I'll do 2 edits rather than 3? Yes, because often, I'm getting better as a podcaster now. So because I'm getting better at the interview aspects and I'm getting better at speaking myself, I get more from the guests. So because of that, it doesn't require as much editing. So sometimes I can skip a third edit or whatever, but only when I know the first 2 are good enough. And so, yeah, I do enjoy it. It is time consuming. But my big thing is I wanted to do this in a professional manner. I'm creating something that I'm putting out there to driving instructors. Is it the best in the world in terms of the quality? No, because I'm still learning. There are podcasts out there been doing it for 20 years, so they're going to be better than me. They've got like 15 years more experience than me. They're going to be in a better position. I cannot afford a studio to hire every time. We're recording this in the bloody hotel room, with a combination of a hotel room and a car, right? So the audio is just not going to be perfect. And it annoys me. But I haven't got the budget to go and invest in everything. But what I can do is I can do the best that I can do. So I've spent years investing in myself to become the best podcaster I can be through training and equipment and courses, actual courses and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it is time consuming. It can be frustrating, but yes, I do really enjoy it. We're just taking a brief pause to give a shout out to some of the latest premium members, and they are Dan Neighbour, Stephen, and John Hornby. These folks have decided to upgrade their CPD and get immediate access to some of the best training and development resources available to ADIs and PDIs, including training things on like coaching, mindfulness, mental health, and the standards check. They also get access to some of the best minds in the industry like Bob Morton, Emma Cottington, Ray Seagrave, and Tom Stenson. Plus, they even get some more from me, but don't let that put you off. To find out more, or to sign up for a free week's trial, head to theinstructorpodcast.com or use the link in the show notes. And I also want to take a moment to point you in the direction of Bright Coaching, who recently announced a new online version of their accredited qualification in coaching, behavioural change, and driver psychology. The first online cohort kicks off on October the 31st, making this year's Halloween extra special. To find out more or to sign up to the newsletter, head to brightcoaching.net. But for now, let's get stuck back into the show.
You said some interesting things there, and actually you said something earlier as well that I was going to ask. You said about being able to sort of tweak your interview techniques, and you just said there about courses that you've been on. Like, part of me wants to ask what courses you've been on, because clearly you've done that to improve the podcasts, but also your background. Like, what did you do before you were an instructor? Did you have something in that similar background that's helped you now, or is this just completely new for you and you've just learned as you've gone along?
Okay, so I think it's two different questions. Background and what I've done to become a better podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
I'll come to what I've done to be a better podcaster first. So, do you know what? The biggest thing I've done is actually the easiest and the most enjoyable, and that's listen to other podcasts. Like I said, I've always been radio. I've always been audio books, podcasts, all this kind of stuff. And listening to the other people produce theirs has given me the best inspiration. And that's free. Well, no, I pay for some memberships, but in principle, that's free. It's almost like sitting on a driving lesson. It's I've been able to go and listen to some of the best in the world, just deliver a podcast. And I'll give you a couple of examples, actually. So one of the shows I run is one part of the Instructor podcast is the Green Room. That's the one I do with Chris Spencer. You've been on that, Laura. And you were a fine guest.
Thanks.
But it's very cold open. So I'm using podcast terms. Cold open, a very quick intro. It's like as quick as I can get it, very quick. This is the Green Room, this is Chris, this is me, and then we get stuck straight in. I keep it as tight as possible without doing it completely cold. And we might talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and then I'll say, let's set the table. And I'll let Chris introduce himself and say that he's from the DITC and Theory Test Explained and this kind of stuff. Then I'll introduce myself and talk about the membership and the website and stuff like that. And then we'll get on with the rest of the show. So I got that from a wrestling podcast. There's someone I listened to, a chap called Wade Keller, who his audio's crap, to be fair. But he does a wrestling podcast, and that's often how he does it. Really cold intro, not like mine. His cold intro will just start off with a question to the guest. There'll be no introduction at all. They'll get 20 minutes in and they'll say, let's set the table. And I'm like, I love that. I'm going to bring that into mine at some point. The Instructor podcast, where I introduce it and say, I am your host, Terry Cook. I got the little phrasing of that from a chap called Mike Munzer, who runs the Evolution of Horror podcast. I'm like, I love the way he introduces horror podcast. I'm going to steal and adapt and tweak that to work for mine. So you listen to other podcasts and you listen to the way people interview and the way they produce it and all that kind of stuff, and you can get so much ideas and inspiration. And stealing stuff blatantly, but owning it and being honest about that. That's a really good way of doing it. But also learn what not to do. And there's nothing worse when someone keeps interrupting the guest over and over and over again, because I'm just going, right, I know what I'm not doing on mine now. So that's the biggest thing I've done. I've also done a lot of one-on-one stuff with, I think the biggest influence on me with this was probably Robin Bates. I've done a lot of one-to-one stuff around him. We've done sessions where we've done a Zoom where he's listened to my podcast during the Zoom and ripped it to shreds. And I've done the same for other people with that. I provide some coaching services around podcasting as well. And that's one of the best things I've ever done. It's so demoralizing, though. It really is. But I needed it at the time. So, lots of stuff around there. I did a course in editing with a guy called Tanner Campbell, or Campbell Tanner. I can't remember his name now. He stopped doing his stuff now, but I did some stuff with him a while back. So it kind of a real big mishmash of stuff. But I put the same emphasis into my training for this as I did with my training to become an instructor. because I want it to be the best it can be. And I'm still not happy with it because it's not where I want it to be. It's not as good as it can be, but we're getting there.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the question about what you did before you was an instructor in a minute. I just want to kind of run with what you've said there. You've said about other podcasts and whatnot. Do you see those as rivals? Like the other sort of industry related podcasts, are they your rivals? Are they your competition? How do you view that?
You do ask good questions.
It's my job. Literally.
Technically, yes. Technically. Because they are. If someone else has another driving instructor podcast, they are my competition. Right? If you, Laura Morris, only have time to listen to one driving instructor podcast a week, then you've got to choose between the 6 or whatever it is that there are now. So in that aspect, yes, they are. But do I view them that way? Not particularly. No, I don't think I do. I think I don't know how I would term how I view them. I've said right from day one, I've said it publicly on the show, that I'd love more instructor podcasts because I need someone to listen to. I don't just want to listen to my stuff. I want to listen to other stuff. So it's good that there's more out there. You won't ask me this, but whatever. I would like to see a bit more creativity. I would like to see a bit more originality. And I appreciate that's difficult. I really do. But that's part of the reason why I introduced the 1 Minute Driving Instructor Tips podcast, because let's make something a bit fresh. And look, it's not original. There are podcasts out there that are 1 minute podcasts on this thing, but there isn't one in our industry and no one had done it. And I wanted one, so I did it. So yeah, I think that I don't view them as competition, but technically are. So yeah, I don't know. I think that answers your question.
And again, you've said some good stuff there about you want to see more creativity, maybe the podcasts that are already out there. But if someone came to you within the industry and said, Terry, you're good at what you do, I want to start doing a podcast within the industry. First of all, would you encourage them to do that? And secondly, if you had to give them your top 3 tips for starting a podcast, what would those tips be?
I would have to ask one question before I could do any of that, and that question would simply be why. Because I think there's a misconception around podcasts of A, what they are, but also of how to use them. So I've seen many a person over here, not necessarily in the instructor industry, but generally, that have the idea, I'm going to start a podcast because I want to promote my thing. And I'm like, hold on. So you're going to start a podcast that you're then going to have to promote your thing. Why not just promote your thing? And so it's the reason why. Again, I gave my reason why. Why did I do it? Because there was this massive, big void in the industry that I wanted to fill. Well, so it would largely depend on the reason. Now, if they gave me a good reason, maybe they can see a gap that they want to fill. Maybe they want to use it to promote themselves. Whatever the reason be, and then yes, 100% I would encourage them. In terms of a top 3 tips, I would, first tip, accept that you're going to be shit, because you will be, but get better. The second tip would be invest a little bit. And that doesn't necessarily mean go and spending loads of money. But it means invest accordingly. So if you're going heavy into podcasting, like I did, then you probably want to invest a bit more. Now, that doesn't just mean money, it means time. I genuinely think maybe this will be the third tip, actually. Listen to podcasts. Do you know what? The best thing, I think, and this is going to sound like a plug and it's really not meant to be, but I think the best thing anyone could do to learn how to podcast will go back to listen to my episode 1 and listen all the way through, and you will hear, if you listen properly, you will hear where the show improves. And when I listen back, and I do every now and again, I go back and listen to season 1, and there's some good stuff in there. And I would encourage anyone to go back and listen, especially to the more random episodes. But yeah, it's not always great when I compare it to what we do now.
You said about investing time as much as anything else. So I know that you're still teaching learners. How much of your, if you had a percentage, how much of your time is spent editing, doing podcast and membership stuff compared to your learners and your normal day-to-day sort of teaching?
It's probably about 40, 60. I tend to do about 20 hours of lessons a week. And I tend to spend more than that on podcast stuff. I don't need to do all the stuff I do podcast-wise. There's bits I do because I have ideas and my ideas excite me. I'm like, oh, I could try this thing, and then I'll spend 4 hours doing it, and I'll go, no, that was stupid, why have I done that? So I probably could actually trim down some of it, but it's why I do the Instructor podcast in seasons. Because when I do a season, that's the thing that takes up the most of the time. Every episode on a season will take 10 hours. And I do roughly 10 episodes a season, so it's 100 hours for one season, and that's across 3 months. So you can see the time that takes to create. Whereas when I do stuff on membership, it doesn't take as long because I don't have to do an intro, a mid-roll, a post-roll. I can just record the audio, edit the audio, and then the audio goes out. And it's often a bit more about things that I know more about, so I can be a bit more influenced. And often there'll be episodes where it's just me, so I don't have to worry about the guest as much, So I can often get the process down there to half of what it is for the other stuff. But yeah, it's probably about 40, 60, but in theory I could probably make it 50-50 if I was a bit less adventurous.
Are you happy with that balance? Like, is that where you want it to be?
No.
Where do you want it to be?
I want 10 hours a week on learners.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go through all my finances now. It's probably not the smartest thing to do, but I want my income to be in a point where I only need to do 10 hours a week with learners for this very, very genuine reason. How much time am I going to have to put into my membership and the podcast and all the other stuff that I do if I'm only doing 10 hours a week? Because, instructors know that if you did 6 hours a day, that's not 6 hours work. That's potentially 8 or 9 hours work that day. So, if I can get that down to working, for example, 2 days a week, well, I've now got 5 days that I can put into making this podcast even better, that I can put into creating better content, that I can go back, because I had to cancel the 6 for 60 that I was doing this year. No, not 6 for 60. What did I call it? The Meganar, which I've done 2 before. I had to cancel this year's, partly because I had throat issues, but also partly because of time and stuff like that. Well, if I'm only doing 2 days a week on lessons, I can do 2 or 3 of them Meganars a year. It's like, what could I do with this time? And that's genuine where my head goes. And you probably hear my excitement there, the idea of, get all this time, what could I do? This would be amazing.
So that's interesting, kind of almost starting at the beginning again. So why are we doing season 8? If time is an issue and you weren't going to do season 8, why are we here?
So it was never the time that was the issue for season 8. It was, well, I'll come back to the reason in a sec, but yeah, it was never time that was an issue. The time is budgeted for this, and full shout out at the minute to Stuart Lockyer, Bright Coaching, who came on as a sponsor in season 7, sponsoring this one as well. That's given me more time, because that bit of investment means that throughout podcast recording season, I can drop my working hours a little bit on lessons, which gives me a bit more time to put into the podcast and make it even better, which is why season 7 was the best podcast I've produced, because I had that little bit more time. To be fair, I probably didn't put more time into it. I just had more time to sleep, But that was never the reason why I was debating season 8 or season 9 or anything going forward. It was, there was a few reasons, but I didn't know what to do next. I'd achieved all the goals I'd set. I'd reached a quarter of the industry, not a quarter, sorry, 10% of the industry. Throughout a season, I'll have 4,000 people listening across a season. 10% of the industry. That was my goal. I remember saying that on season 1. I had Dan Meredith on the show, which was a goal. I wanted to achieve 5 seasons. I achieved 5 seasons. I've had all kinds of just amazing guests and stuff, and it was like, well, what next? And also, as we've spoke about, there were these other podcasts come along. It's like, well, is the Instructor podcast needed now? if everyone else is doing this stuff, am I needed? And I decided that I wasn't going to do another season unless I could do something different. And then speaking to you, I got the idea for season 8, which is what we're doing now, which is In Conversation with Laura Morris. And it was like, this is awesome. I can go and meet someone. I can spend 2 days with them. We can talk about all these interesting subjects. And I'm just going to drop them all on the same day. I have no idea how this will be received, but it excites me. This is great. So if I can keep coming up with, say original, it's not original. People have done this before. Netflix does it every week, right? But creative and an element of originality and not necessarily done in our industry and just something a bit different. If I can keep coming up with this stuff, I will keep the Instructor podcast going. And stuff like the 6 for 60 with the 6 trainers on where they each get 60 seconds to answer a question. Then I come up with a green room. Then it's a 1-minute ADI tips. And it's Driving Instructors Division 0. Then it's, whatever it might be. As long as I can keep coming up with this stuff so stuff isn't boring, I will keep doing it. The time isn't the issue there. Well, no, it is. I can't add new stuff in, but I can keep going with the seasons because I've budgeted for that, essentially.
I like that. I think even just in your voice, I can hear the excitement. I can hear the enthusiasm. And I think you have to keep that enthusiasm, and you clearly have. And I like that. I do like that. Take me back then. We spoke a minute ago about Terry before he was an instructor. Who was that person, and how did Terry become an instructor?
So I had a long pause there, and I immediately thought about my edit. Well, I'm going to leave that long pause in because there was a reason there was a long pause there, and it was back in probably 2010. I first thought about becoming an instructor. Probably before that, I don't know, maybe about 2007 perhaps. I thought about becoming an instructor, but I was with a different partner at the time, and they a little bit controlling, and shut the idea down pretty quick. So I didn't do it. But it tickled my brain for a long time, and yeah, it just tickled, and then I married now ex, but I married my wife, who wasn't the controlling one, and she got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I was working at McDonald's at the time, and I quit that job because I needed to be at home more. I needed to be able to manage my diary. So, okay, what job can I do that I'm in charge of my diary and isn't require me to do 9-hour days? And I can do 9-hour days, but I don't have to do 9-hour days. I can mix and match. And driving instructor. I also love training people. That's my big thing. I've always loved that. Whatever job I've done, I've always fallen into training, but I'd love one-on-one training more than anything else. And we don't get more one-on-one than in a car with someone. So it's like, okay, let's go and try this. Obviously, didn't bother taking control of my diary and just worked whatever hours I was sent by Red at the time, and then just continued to do whatever students said for quite a long time. But that was the rolling ball that got me in.
Okay, so final question for you then. Do you regret becoming an instructor?
That's an interesting question. Why regret? Why would I regret becoming an instructor? For those listening to this audio podcast, Laura's shrugging her shoulders. No, not even a little bit.
Is there anything else you'd rather be doing? Like, dream job? Is this, you happy? Are you content? Is there another job out there that you would want to do if you had the opportunity? Or are you content?
No, I wanted to be a radio DJ. I'm a podcaster and a driving instructor. Look, here's what I do, right? I create audio and video, in many cases, trainings for driving instructors. Now, whether people view them as trainings, whether they view them as courses, whether they view them as podcasts or episodes or whatever the crap they want to call them, is almost irrelevant to me. But I create this stuff that people can learn from. What a privileged position to be in. What a wonderful thing to be able to create this stuff that helps people. Whether that helps them through a definitive, I can go and put this into my lessons, whether it helps them through a, wow, that was really motivating. I can I can feel uplifted from that. What a wonderful thing to be able to do. I create the stuff for learners like the 5-Minute Theory and the Driving Test podcast, which is now kind of dead in water. But, I've created this stuff. It's still one of in the top 100 how-to educational charts, whatever it is. I haven't released an episode for that for a year. So I've created this stuff for learners that helps. I get messages every week from learners that I've never spoken to. Thank you for helping me pass my theory test. In fact, one of the best things that have happened to me ever was actually last year. I met Kev Field for a training day, and we all had a picture taken, and I put it online somewhere, and I think Kev shared it, and someone commented, who I've never seen before, and there were 3 of us on this picture, and someone commented, I've never seen before, and they said, every instructor in this picture has helped me pass. I'm like, I don't have no idea who this is. How great a feeling is that? So I get to do that with the instructor stuff. I've got a membership that earns me money, that helps, that because it earns me money, means that I can now create more content. So I get to create all this content for the members, which is awesome. We go into more in depth, we cover all this pretty cool stuff. Then I get to help learners every day that learn to drive. And I work with awesome learners because I've got, don't have anymore, good social media, but the 5-Minute Theory works on that. I get people coming to me because they've heard me on the 5-Minute Theory. Unfortunately, sometimes they message me from Norfolk and I'm based in Yorkshire, but, point's still the same. So we get to work with these awesome learners. Learners, as an example, I had one fail a test the other day when I was sat in the back. And she went, as she's carrying on, she said to the examiner, I know I failed, but can I finish and show you how good I am? Like, what an amazing thing. This is why I work with these people. I get to do all that. As a result of this, I'm now working with people in the road safety industry, where I'm writing for Good Motoring magazine. I produce a Project Edward podcast, and I've got people like Dr. Elizabeth Box, James Evans, these people that reach out to me and say, Terry, can we run this by you? I mean, seriously, what a position to be in. How could I ever regret this job or find a better one? Don't get better than it is right now. It's all downhill from here for me.
I was actually going to say one more final question then. What's your next goal? What's next?
You've been listening to me too long. One more final question. There's always another final question. Do you know what? I don't really have any goals right now. I am working on processes, and I appreciate that might sound like a cop-out and a bit cheesy, but I'm working on doing the thing and seeing where the thing takes me. And part of that, and this is just being honest for a second, part of that was when I got divorced a couple of years ago, 2022, and I moved home. So I moved into my flat. I turned 40 about 2 weeks after I moved into my flat. So I'm like a 40-year-old bloke living by himself. There's, all this kind of stuff. It's like my entire world got turned upside down, and all the goals I had were all based around like supporting family and all, family stuff. And now it's just me, and I'm still finding out what I want to do. So I'm still finding the road safety stuff really fascinating, but I don't really know where that goes. I suppose the goal is I don't want people down the road. I want that Vision Zero goal, but that's not a me goal. That's an industry goal, if you like. So I don't have an overriding goal, and I don't really have it. Like podcast numbers, I suppose the goal is I want them to keep growing, but I don't have a target. So it's all working on the process now. I can't make every episode better than the last, but I can make every season better than the last in one way or another. I want to keep thinking of new ideas and keep thinking of different things I can bring in, and keep bringing in new guests and old guests, and bringing old guests back on, the ones that I think have contributed a lot, and coming up with these ideas and stuff. So maybe the goal is just to keep going for now. And at some point there will be a spark and I'll have an idea of a long-term goal. But at the minute, I'm just enjoying shit.
I like that. Sometimes you just have to go with the flow. I like that.
Do you know what? I've always had issues with goals, like the SMART goals.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been keen on realistic goals. It's like, it's boring. To me, releasing a podcast for driving instructors wasn't realistic. It just wasn't. I can't do that. I'm not a trainer. I don't know about this stuff. How can I release this podcast? So if I'd have gone on the premise of a SMART goal, this podcast would never have existed. This podcast, here you go, BHAG, the Dan Meredith goal of BHAG, Big Hairy Ass goal, was to release a podcast. So there, here's the goal. Actually, do you know what? Here is the goal, or something I'm working on. I have been working on for 2 years, and I've deleted twice. A book. Mm-hmm. I'm working on the Not a Standards Check book. that will be at some point, but I've deleted it twice, so.
Why have you deleted it?
Oh, God, right, this is episode 2 now. No.
Does that come back to your confidence, or?
Not really. I didn't like where it went.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't approve. So I think the first draft, I did not like my tone. I sounded like, excuse my language, a condescending dick. If I'd have read that book from someone else, I'd have thrown it away. Because the content was good, but the tone was abysmal. I sounded really preachy, which I try really hard not to do. It's not always, I don't always succeed, but generally I do okay. I think the second one, I went too far the other way, and I lost some of the content and the message I would try to get across, which is basically you don't need to train for a standards check to be a good driving instructor. There's more to it than that. So, and look, the work is still there if I need it. I can still go back and take ideas from it. It isn't gone completely, but it's rewriting. So yeah, I'd be really, really happy if I got that out this year. I don't think I will. And there's no pressure on me to do that. There's enough time in the world for me to write a book.
Something you can think about, and when you've got some time, you can. Yeah.
Say that again.
When you've got some time, you can think about it.
Yep.
I like that.
Cool. Well, I've genuinely really enjoyed this.
I feel like I've learned so much about you in the last 45 minutes or an hour, and it's been really nice actually just to listen to you. Because often you're the one asking questions, and it's been nice just sit and listen.
I think, if I go right back to the first question you asked, which is why I don't do this, there's still a stigma. Even though I'm the person that is anti-standards check training. No, that's not true. I'm not anti-standards training. Anti-only standards check training. There's still a stigma a little bit that if I don't talk about standards check stuff, people won't listen. And I never want to be the expert on the standards check. Never, ever. And that's not a criticism of anyone that is. I have zero interest in that. I might change my mind at some point, because that's what I do. Listen to the podcast, you'll hear me change it 3 times an episode. But I've very little interest in that. But because I've got this little thing in my brain that's like, oh, you can't run a podcast if you don't talk about a standards check, I think that's something that holds me back a little bit, because I know I'm not an expert on that, so I hold myself back a little bit as well. So there you go. It's like a counselling session today, because going right back to that first one, I can see a little bit of that. However, I also appreciate an irony there, in that I had someone recently tell me that they can't run their business a certain way because it needs to be standards check based. You can't sell it if it's not standards check based. I'm like, use me as the example of how that's not true. Mm-hmm. Because go listen to my episodes on sleep or coaching wrestlers on promos or whatever it might be. See how much there is about the standards check there. There's bits because it's part of this industry, but I reckon it's less than 10% of what I do.
I like that. And it has to be different. Like you say, there has to be different things. And I think sometimes we often miss the other bits, like self-care, sleep, etc., because we think it has to be standards check related or PDI related, but actually there's so many different elements there that you can bring in.
Yeah. And look, the thing is, I did this because it was missing, and now more people are doing it, which is amazing. I wish people had been doing it soon. Well, I don't, because I want to on the podcast. But and do you know what? When we spoke before about would there be a season 8, 9 or whatever, the question I asked myself was, after season 7, so if there wasn't an Instructor podcast, would I start it now? And I do not know the answer. I do not know the answer. And I think that's a fascinating question. Would I start the Instructor podcast now in the industry the way it is? I do not know. And
yeah, I know that's got me stumped as well. I think the state of the industry is a whole nother episode. That is an interesting question.
But yes, that is another episode, because we've got time of recording, about another 10 hours to go. So, but no, I want to say just at the end of this episode, thank you for joining me. Thank you for that. Some great questions there. I really enjoyed it. And I do want to take the opportunity to thank you for being a friend, because I came down a few months ago, not to talk about the podcast stuff. We just came down for a chat, but obviously it's me, so we spoke podcast stuff. And you gave us this idea, and I really enjoyed doing this. And we are recording this as the first episode of God knows how many. So what I would advise anyone listening to is skip all the middle episodes, go straight to the last one, and see how pissed off Laura sounds with me by that last episode.
There won't be a last episode.
Oh, it's going to keep going.
It's going to keep going.
Right.
I think, yeah, it's an interesting way of doing it, actually. And I think still what fascinates me about doing all of this in season 8 is that you're going to release them all at the same time.
Yep.
That's almost another question, but do you see that working? Or, because that's not how you normally do it.
Genuinely have no idea. I think, well, no, do you know what? No, I'm wrong. No, I know exactly what will happen. There will be some people that love it, there'll be some people that hate it, and there'll be some people that don't care. That's the way everything is, right? But which one will I pay most attention to? The people that hate it. Because I'll just feel like, oh, can I ever do this again? I have zero. I do not know whether it's going to be more like it, more dislike it, or anything like that. And if you're listening to this, please let me know. I'm fascinated, because look, I may have mentioned this on the pre-record or whatever again, but I think the goal for this is that the structure for the Instructor podcast going forward, and I might have changed your mind by next week, but the structure is that I will continue doing the regular seasons. So season 9 is going to kick off in October, and it will run for about 10 weeks to end the year. And then probably season 10 will probably kick off in March 2025, and I'll look to do 2 of those seasons a year, and they'll drop every Sunday. In between that, I want to try and do 1 or 2 of these a year, where I go and meet someone and spend 10 hours talking to them and split them up into episodes, and then drop them all on the same day to create something different. And in between those, just dropping random bonus episodes on a Thursday and the green room. And this is stuff that excites me. But yes, just one more time, thank you for doing this. Thank you for those really cool questions and put me on the spot right from that first one where you made me feel very uncomfortable. So yeah, big thank you for today.
It's been good. Thank you.
So I do want to give a big thank you to Laura Morris for joining me on this crazy idea that I had to go down and record with her for a couple of days. And we ended up recording for about 7 or 8 hours, and we've got all this awesome content. So if this is the first episode you've listened to, which I would encourage as it's the first of season 8, you've got another handful to get through. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's definitely something I'm going to be doing again. I'm labeling these In Conversation With. So this is In Conversation with Laura Morris. I think I'm going to do these in between each regular season, so that the regular seasons will be back, and we'll be kicking off on the end of October, season 9, and that'll be all based around tech, basically, car tech. So very much looking forward to that. I'm very much looking forward to doing some more of these In Conversation stuff. In between that, we're also going to be releasing some of the regular bonus midweek content that we do, but I'm also interested in your feedback on this series, if you like, on how you find it having every episode dropped all at once, how you found it just being me and the same person. You know, any feedback is always welcome, you know that. And again, I want to give a big thank you to Bright Coaching, in particular Stuart Lockery, who has continued his sponsorship of the Instructor podcast, and delighted to be able to work with such amazing partners and the people of the caliber of Stuart and the caliber of organisation of Bright Coaching. To find out more about Bright Coaching, head to brightcoaching.net, but you can also find them at the Intelligent Instructor and ADI NJC Expo. They've got a trade stand down there, so go and visit them to find out more. They're not going to pressure you into buying anything. Just go and say hello, and I'm sure Stuart might even give you a tip or two if you need it. And that's in Newark at September the 29th. That's at ADI NJC and Intelligent Instructor Expo. But last thing I want to mention on today's episode is just the premium content, because the membership continues to grow. It's grown regularly over the past few years, and the feedback I keep getting is quite simply that it's some of the best CPD available around. We do deep dives into a whole host of topics with some of the best trainers and outside influences that that we can get, basically. So if you want to become a better driving instructor or run a better driving school or increase your prices, then head over to www.theinstructorpodcast.com or use the link in the show notes and you can go sign up for a free trial. Or if you want to go big, you can sign up to our top tier, which is £22 a month plus VAT, where you get access to everything plus all the interactive content like presentations and attending podcast recordings live and open Zoom rooms, all this kind of stuff. That's instructorpodcast.com, and I will look forward to seeing you over there. But for now, let's just keep raising standards.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
I'll tell you what, that Laura Morris is pretty good, isn't she?